and welcome to week 2 of my BSL sign language course vlog. Now in week 1 we learned some very interesting basics about BSL. Probably the two takeaways from that very first week were sign space, which in other words is to sign within this kind of area here. So you're not kind of going way out here and way out and way down there, you're signing within this area. And also BSL grammar. BSL has its own grammar that's different from English. So instead of saying, for example, what is your name, you start off by saying name, then you start off by saying who you're directing it to, so you, and then what. So you're structuring the sentences in a very different way, but in a way actually, when you stop and think about it, does make a lot of sense. So having learnt those basics in the very first week, we also then went on to look at facial expressions, because it's not just the signing, it's also what you do with your face and with your body language that makes a huge difference. And I'm sure we're going to work on that and develop that further. I know we'll be recapping that in week 2. So since week 1, I've been looking and practicing the alphabet, because we learnt the alphabet. Now I did know the alphabet before, but of course knowing the letters is completely different to actually knowing the letters and then forming them into words and doing it in a really clear, concise way so that the person who's looking at you is able to read the signs. For example, T, which is that, it's very easy if you're not used to what you're doing to kind of like, you know, miss, and you end up being a bit fingers and thumbs, and that all comes with practice. So that is what I've been doing during this first week. I'm just randomly looking at things and just spelling them out. So there's a phone there in front of me that I'm recording this on at the moment, and behind it I'm leaning it on a cup. And he's noticed there, actually, I kind of went to do pee and I sort of missed my finger. So all of that kind of thing is going to come with practice. And I got out of the shower the other day and I was working my way around the room from the towel well to the sink and just trying to sign the words. And I think really I've just got to keep doing that, and I will gradually get better and get faster. So anyway, I'm going to head in now to the second week's lesson of BSL Level 1 course, and see what we're going to learn this week. I'll catch up with you on the other side. So I've just come out of the lesson, my week 2 BSL course, and we were actually covering the subjects for lesson 3 because we did lesson 1 and 2 all in the first week, if that makes any kind of sense. We covered a huge amount of stuff today. I mean, it's not information overload. I was going to say it's information overload. It's just the fact of taking on board so many new things. So we did numbering, so numbers, and also then the way to talk about those numbers in terms of, for example, age or weight or money, that kind of thing. So again, I'm holding my phone with one hand, so I can't do the sort of two-handed signs. But for example, there's 17, which is like that. And then if you were saying your age, then your age, you actually go from your nose. So age, and then you say 17. I wish. And that was a long time ago. And but if you were doing money, for example, then it's slightly different. You sort of come out from your chin, I think, to start off with. That's right, you were doing I'm trying to remember now. You were doing from your chin for money, for 1 to 10, I think it was, and then after that you did have to use the other hand. But please don't take what I'm saying as gospel, because I've just come out of the lesson and my head is spinning. What else did we do in the lesson? My God, we covered so much. I can't remember. What does that tell you? Yeah, I'm going to go home. I'm going to reflect on everything that we learned in the lesson, because my head is absolutely spinning, and I'm going to do a little bit more video, probably tomorrow in this video, to kind of fill in the gaps. Because yeah, it's just so much to take in, and I think that's actually part of the worry for me. It's not just the fact of learning lots of new things, it's actually remembering them, because when you do them at the time, when you're doing them in the lesson, it's not so bad. You can do it. Somebody's just told you what it is, whatever it is that you're learning, and then you're doing it there and then. It's not quite so bad. But when you then have to try and remember that next week, or in 2 weeks, or in a month, then that's different. And of course, that's where the practice comes in. So our teacher was suggesting that we do we do Zoom get-togethers, that terrible piece of malware masquerading as software that is Zoom. And don't get me started on that. But it's a good idea, actually, all things considered. It is a good idea to do that kind of thing to kind of practice between the group. So the group of us get together. I hope it does come off, because I think that will be quite good. And there's absolutely no doubt that repetition and practice is the way to remember this stuff. Anyway, I'm going to get home now. It's the end of a long day, and I will do a little bit more thoughts on today's lesson and tell you a little bit more about what we covered, what I've remembered, in just a moment. So it's the next day, and I've had a chance to reflect on some of the things that we learned. And apart from the numbers that I mentioned earlier on, we also talked about greetings. So we're saying like good morning, and we're saying good evening and good night. And also ways of greeting people in a formal and informal ways, and also of course of leaving, saying that goodbye, or you've got to go, or whatever, you want to get away. So that kind of thing. Something that's occurred to me actually overnight is with this thing about remembering things. And there's a guy on the course who has obviously done it before, because he is chipping in quite a bit. He seems to know a lot of what we're already doing. I'm not entirely sure why he's there, really. I think he might be there because his wife is on the course and she is a newbie. So maybe he's just there as a bit of moral support or to carry a bag, so I really don't know. But it's quite good that he's there, because he has chipped in with a couple of little things. For example, in week 1, he was mentioning a way of remembering sister and brother. And he was saying that sisters are nosy and brothers fight. Now, of course, that's rubbish, because that doesn't necessarily happen. However, it's still a way of remembering it. Sisters aren't necessarily nosy, but it's still a way of remembering. I haven't forgotten sister and brother because of what he said. This week, when we were talking about numbers, I was actually, when I drove, after I'd recorded that last bit of video, I was driving home. When I was sitting at traffic lights or whatever, I was going through numbering 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on, 6, 7, 8. I was going through the numbers. I got all the way up to 99, and then realised I'd forgotten what 100 was. We'd only covered it, I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour before I was trying to do it, but I'd forgotten it. However, I could remember 1,000, and that was because, say, 1,000 is like that, and this guy in the class was saying, well, you can remember that because it's a bit like the comma in 1,000. So it's a 1,000's a bit like the comma. There's another way of doing thousands as well. You can go 1,000 like that. But yeah, that's quite good, you see. A comma, I remember that. And last week with the sister and the brother, yeah, I'd remembered that as well. So I think it's kind of like a word association. It's a pictorial thing. For example, some words in BSL are very pictorial. So cat, for example, is the whiskers of a cat. So you kind of remember that. You're not likely to forget that in a hurry. But other things maybe you won't remember because they're not pictorial. So I don't know. So boy, I think was like that. Girl, I think was like that. But they're not necessarily. You wouldn't remember them because of the signs don't really relate to anything in particular. So that I think is something that I've got to look at. Something that I personally. I've done that in the past actually. I did a little bit of French, and one of the systems that I used for that was a memory system of being able to associate pictures and actions and things with a word, and that helps to retain it in your mind. Somehow, for some reason, that is a way of remembering things. That system probably has got a name. If I knew what that was, I have actually forgotten it, which is ironic. So anyway, I need to look at some of the words and the actions, the things that we're doing, and try and associate them with things, a bit like sisters being nosy and brothers fighting, and I think that's going to help me a lot to remember. Anyway, that's quite enough content for this week. There's a lot to practice, there's a lot of bits in the homework, things for us to watch and to read and to try and recap. Considering this was only lesson 2 out of 32, it shows really what a huge amount of information we're going to be taking on board, and it's quite good really to be exercising my mind to such an extent. Quite a good thing to do, seeing as I'm such an old git. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Do post your comments if you have any, and I will do my best to answer them. And if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you next week for another update. Thanks so much for watching.